very much, Chairman Stewart, and thank you all for your testimony and for your years of work. One of the things that I've heard frequently here in Congress is that we don't need new laws, we just need to enforce what we have. So, Dr. Honeycutt, in your testimony, you said you'll hear others testify that EPA has ample guidance on conflict of interest, bias, and balance. The problem is they don't consistently follow it. So I'm glad you recognize that or identify that as an issue. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I do hear from constituents who question the regulations and rules being promulgated by the EPA. And central to their concerns is the slow pace with which regulations are developed, implemented. Processes seem to slow down, and that's a concern that's expressed about other federal agencies as well. And as we hear so often in this era of what seems to be governing from one crisis to the next, what we're looking for is certainty in the communities. Certainly the business community wants that certainty and stability to promote growth. So in that context, Dr. Grifo, based on your expertise in studying this issue, would the changes made to EPA's Scientific Advisory Board under the legislation we're discussing today expedite or improve the EPA's process in receiving independent scientific advice?
In the amendments, there are one or two things that I think are actually helpful, but I think the vast majority would have the long-term effect of slowing this down. And I think, as you've rightly said, whether you're coming from a business perspective or, a constituent, other regular people perspective, slow down isn't good. I mean, slow down means that, the regulations are slower, the health impacts continue, and so on, but it also means uncertainty for business, and it also means that, things happen. I mean, if we don't do this right, you end up with products on the market that are tainted or, problematic, and that's not good for business either. So getting it right and doing it in a timely fashion is what I think we're all after.
Thank you very much. And I know in your testimony you talked about one of the issues was this need to respond in writing to public comment, and I think you've effectively identified some of the problems that could come with that. And I wanted to ask another question, too. That when the draft bill was introduced in the last Congress, it included the provision that would have limited the input of academic scientists to just 10% of advisory panels. And I mentioned that's not in this current version of the bill. It's unclear why it was taken out, but this provision could be placed back in at some time. So I wonder if you could explain for the committee what the impact to the science at the EPA would be if that type of provision were included in the final bill.
I think what's important, and we're conflating, are conflict of interest and bias. I think that's what we need to really look at, is getting committees that have no conflict of interest or very minimal, and as a rare exception, as the National Academy suggests. And really, it's not about industry or not industry. It's about bias and conflict of interest. And I think we are going to find people with bias and conflicts in industry and in academia. And I think the point of submitting a lot of information, the point of having opportunities for public comment, is to be able to allow the agencies, and there are really amazing people at the agencies that spend enormous amounts of time doing this screening, to get it right, to get the combination that's correct.
Thank you. To your knowledge, did either the Keystone Center or the Bipartisan Policy Center reports specifically recommend that there be more people from industry on advisory panels at the cost of reducing or eliminating some of the academic government-funded scientists?
No, absolutely not. And I should say, it was rather an amazing and wonderful experience to be on the Keystone, on that Research Integrity Roundtable, because it was folks from academia. We had people from Bayer, Dow, DuPont, American Chemistry Council, and when we sat around those tables and had those extended conversations, and we met off and on for 18 months, we agreed. We came together on the things that are in there. And the same way with the Bipartisan Policy Center, the name Bipartisan Policy suggests a broad input. And in fact, if you look at the list of those participants, they came from across the spectrum. And what we all agreed on was, in both of these reports, is that what's important is really looking at bias so that you get a balanced panel, conflict of interest so that you get a panel that minimizes or eliminates those conflicts.
And just to follow up then, are the conflict of interest principles laid out in the draft bill we're discussing based on the recommendations of Keystone or the Bipartisan Policy Center?
No.
Thank you very much. And I very much, Chairman Stewart. I want to start by saying that The witnesses here today are all professionals with years of experience and deserve to be treated as such, regardless of whether we agree or disagree with their positions. So I just wanted to state that for the record, and I hope that the other members will respect that as well. I want to clarify something that came up in Mr. Weber's question. Dr. Grifo, in your written testimony, this is very clear, but I'm concerned about the record. I want to make sure that it's clear for those just listening as well. When you talked about how everyone on one of the EPA's SABs should be a special government employee, I'm concerned that some people thought that meant that it could only mean somebody who was employed by the government and not an industry person. But your written testimony makes clear that when a member of a committee that's created to provide independent advice is appointed as a special government employee, that's a specific term that requires that they comply with the government ethics rules. So I want to clarify that for the record. And perhaps, Dr. Grifo, if you could explain a little bit about what that means to be a special government employee, to really make clear what the requirements are and clarify that it does include people from industry. If they are appointed as a special government employee, that doesn't mean you exclude industry people.
Absolutely. It's just a way of appointing people to government to advisory committees. It's a term that refers to the number of days per year that they work and so on. It's a piece of the bureaucracy. But I think the other thing that's important is that, academia does not mean no experience with industry. I think our academic world and and the corporate world are increasingly interdigitated, and so to put someone in this pile or this pile becomes a little bit artificial, because I think we cross those piles on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grifo. And just again to clarify that special government employee does include people from industry. It
Absolutely.
simply means that they need to comply with the government's ethics rules, which I happen to think is a good thing. So thank you all for your testimony. And I think, Mr. Chairman, that we have certainly identified several areas where we agree, and I look forward to working with you and getting the input of the other members. And I hope we can come up with some meaningful policy that improves the process.